Thank you, sir. Just going to wait for LinkedIn to connect, which always takes the longest. My new graphics card came in today, too.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just excited.
My new rack for my lab/basement showed up yesterday, and
Nice.
I thought it was going to be fully assembled.
Nope. Oh, Larry, you got to send me where you got those drawers. I think you said you got them on Amazon. The
Oh,
wooden
these
ones
these
behind you.
drawers, these
Yeah.
drawers.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That'd be
yeah.
awesome. 'Cause I
Oh,
was
the wooden
looking.
drawers?
Yeah,
Yep.
because I got accumulated a lot of stuff, man. And
No.
like tariffs were gonna hit, and I bought a lot of stuff, and it is really hard for me to organize it without some help, like the things that are behind Larry. So
I'm now just buying used. I just bought a small form factor, a mini PC,
yeah, you should have
and a
told me. I
couple of
have
GrandStream and a couple of
both of those.
Cisco ATAs, so I can set up. I'm going to try setting up a mini Proxmox installation with Asterisk
Nice.
and set up my PBX that way. And if I can use it to run some other things around the house, that'd be grand. That's why I'm going to try Proxmox and Docker. We'll see.
You gotta mute my phone.
I may not be smart enough to do Docker. We'll see.
I can help you with Docker.
I,
All right, you guys ready?
Yep.
Let's do it. This week, I am joined by an amazing cast of characters to discuss hardware supply chain security and how we can maybe just begin to trust the silicon that lives in our devices. Stay tuned. Below the Surface, coming up next. Welcome to Below the Surface. It's episode number 66, being recorded on Friday, January 9th, 2025. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by, well, first my coworker, Mr. Vlad Babkin, is here with us. Vlad, welcome.
Hello.
And many Security Weekly listeners will recognize the next two co-hosts on this show today. Mr. Larry Pesci is here with us. Larry, welcome.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Paul.
Mr. Josh Morpet is here with us.
how are you doing?
Doing great. You guys have been on the show before, too. So,
Yes.
no strangers to the
Just,
show.
just not necessarily at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's going to be a great quick announcement before we get started. Of course, Below the Surface listeners can learn more about Eclipsium by visiting eclipsium.com/go. You'll find the ultimate guide to supply chain security. You'll also find an on-demand webinar called Unraveling Digital Supply Chain Threats and Risk, a paper on the relationship between ransomware and the supply chain, and a customer case study with DigitalOcean. If you're interested in seeing our product in action, you can sign up for a demo at eclipsium.com/go. So what prompted this discussion was a while back, Andrew, a.k.a. Bunny Wong, gave a presentation at Black Hat Asia, and I heard some other podcasters talking about it, and the talk was basically about how do we validate and move towards being able to trust all of the hardware that's in all of the devices that we use every single day in terms of computing. So I was unable to find like a copy of that presentation somewhere. I'm like, I really want to see this talk. He ended up giving it again at hardware.io in the Netherlands, I believe. And they posted it to YouTube. So I've been watching it and culling a lot of stuff, from it, and brought together all of us today to kind of talk about the problem of how do we trust the chips beyond, traditionally what I'm doing when I look at hardware mostly is identifying which chips are there so that I can conduct further security research. So I trust the chips by reading the label. However, I don't know what's inside those chips, which is kind of I think an interesting kind of gateway
Wait,
into
wait,
our topic today.
Paul, you're saying that people lie on the internet and on labels?
Right.
No.
Well, and I have the same concerns with any kind of bill of materials. I'm like, what if someone's lying? But
And
getting
that's the thing.
Go ahead, Larry.
You've got software bill of materials, hardware bill of materials, cryptographic bill of materials, compliance bill, governance bill of materials. I don't care
Hardware
what
bill of
initial is in
materials.
front of the bill of materials. People can lie on the suckers.
Well, if it's an
Yeah.
F, we can call it an F bomb, so that's kind of interesting too. But,
Yeah, that would be a firmware bomb, right?
Right.
Yes,
Right.
that would be a
But
firmware bomb.
but
Mhm.
yeah, Paul, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think back to one of the classic examples about not trusting, where back when we were seeing FTDI chipset stuff for doing serial UART
Yeah.
type of deal,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
that FTDI had the bunch of companies cloned their chips that did it, to the point that the drivers at one point would actually brick the cloned the devices that were the knockoffs. Like, they look identical, they have the same function for the most part because they were reverse engineered,
Right.
but they weren't the actual true product. So, like, all appearances, it looks like the right thing, but how do you actually ensure that it is the right thing that you're purchasing, is in your product, has gone through the entire life cycle, and as is what is accurate in your H bomb or something of the like?
It's interesting to think about the attack vector there too, where that chip inside of the USB to serial device, right? Like, what if that was collecting your keystrokes or something for to come back later? I mean, they'd have to have some kind of network connectivity, but what if, like, in the silicon, they were enabling some kind of covert capture? And those are the kind of things that we worry about with,
Sure.
I think Bunny's presentation really kind of opened my eyes, and expanded my concerns, really, of it's like one thing to know what software you have. It's one thing to know what firmware you have. It's one thing to just, like, maybe use the software that tells you what chips are inside of the device, which is some of what we do at Eclipsium and what many of us, do in Linux commands or whatever. But that then there's what is inside the chip, you know?
Yep.
Like, there's the surface of the chip, but, like, what's actually
Yep.
inside of it, and how do we
Yeah,
determine that? And a
and,
lot of the
and
talk is about that, and ways in which to attempt to validate it, which is, it gets super hard, man, super hard.
yeah. I mean, back to your thinking about what's inside the chip, Paul. Like, exactly your case. Like, when you mentioned, oh, maybe it's doing covert capture. Well, maybe it isn't even doing covert capture. Maybe it's doing covert monitoring and then
Oh,
performing
wait,
actions during covert. I mean, we saw these attacks, right? Where
data
some
manipulation in transit. Yeah, like
you
Yeah.
there's so much, Larry.
well, maybe not even data manipulations, but performing other actions. Like, oh yeah, we see that someone logged into a Cisco router, so we're going to delay, and then we're going to run a command that changes the firewall settings. Or we receive a message on our wireless device, and then we're going to cause the device to explode
Right.
by observing the data in transit, having performed some other action. We saw this. Like, we saw exploding pagers, we
Mm.
saw
So
exploding radios,
it,
because
it
there
gets even more
was no ability for us to validate what was inside those chips as part of
Yeah.
that supply chain was accurate.
Yeah. Vlad.
Yep. So at one point I read an article also when the guys actually took an open source chip, I don't remember what it was, and added exactly one wire to it, just one extra trace. And what happened is that the chip got a covert backdoor which they could trigger to actually get root on the system post factum. It's just one wire on the chip,
Mm.
which was like, I don't remember, it was a long time ago I read it, but like at that point you can just give up. Like, there is no way you're gonna find that wire with any software tooling.
Yeah, certainly not with
And
software.
that's
Some of the things Bunny talks about in the presentation would allow you to find, well, gives you the maybe tools and capabilities to find it, but you have to know what you're looking for too. When we look at these complex, silicon devices, how do I go back and, I'm looking for one trace in seemingly maybe hundreds or thousands.
I want to point out that there's history here. Back 20 years ago, we caught the NSA intercepting Cisco shipments and adding firmware to Cisco devices, and then retaping it with Cisco tape that they snagged somehow, somewhere.
Right.
Snagged. Totally, Cisco never gave it to them. But and they were adding firmware and backdoors to Cisco routers that were going to places that were interesting to them. And I said NSA could be any of a dozen different three-letter agencies. But then we came across, like, I think it was close to 15 or 18 years ago, Travis Goodspeed was telling me how he was putting Linux on the PCBs of a hard drive. So he could have set commands that when things happened, other things would happen, and there would be nothing on the platters to signal. You could take the platters out and read them, and it was just data. But on the PCB of the hard drive, it was actually running a full version of Linux that, not desktop. Paul, please don't try to do a Year of the Linux hard drive desktop.
Right.
But
That would be
you know
hilarious.
and I see this because one of my coworkers was at CES this week, supporting our stuff, and he put a picture on Instagram of this is the year of Linux on the robotic coffee machine.
oh god,
Because at CES they had the coffee machine that the coffees were made with the robot, and on the front panel it had gone out of their UI, and it was the Ubuntu package manager update window.
nice. And so, but there's history here. But we keep going deeper, and from the firmware to the PCB of the hard drive, now into the silicon straight out of the factory, or added later, of malicious or not the owner of the silicon's intent.
Yeah, and it was interesting. Bunny talks about the supply chain for just your hardware itself, right? I mean, there's multiple supply chains involved, but anytime you're creating an electronics device, it goes through. He described, like the people that make the chips. Then it goes to a fab. Then it might be packaged and put together in a different country. And I mean, for me, when you talked about the NSA, modifying Cisco devices, like usually there's a tamper sticker. Not to say that you can't get around the tamper sticker or any kind of tamper-proof controls that are on the device. However,
Tamper Evident Village would like to be talking to you. Yes.
yeah, but much easier if, well, maybe I'm not in the actual fab, but I have access to the facility where the stuff is packaged. And maybe that's where the tamper stuff gets put on. So I can put hardware inside the device before the tamper stuff goes on, before the Cisco tape goes on. So even if you're trying to validate through those methods and check those, it doesn't matter, because the supply chain could have been tampered with before some of these protection measures are put in place.
I'm going to tell you a quick story that somebody told me is fascinating. I got a buddy that works at a major manufacturer of hardware. Okay. And he was telling me that when you need a NAND chip, you just specify what you need. And then the first ship that shows up at the harbor with the right NAND chip, that's what's going on that box.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's it, because they need so many, like they're craving them. And so whichever, and that's why they're all standardized across every manufacturer for various standards, sizes and shapes and density and everything else. Because that way, I don't care. That chip showed up, great. Buy them, get them in here. We're putting them on the boards. So it's really hard to do a end-to-end hardware bill of materials. It's really hard to do an end-to-end. I know what's on that chip, because it may change 20 minutes before it's going to actually get processed and out the door.
Yeah, and how do we know if we have a counterfeit component or not?
Or malicious. What if I set a malicious one in every NAND chip in that entire chip, and then just make sure I've got one loitering offshore, and oh, they want some? Here you go.
Yeah, and as I've said before on previous podcasts, like not everyone has an X-ray machine. Although we happen to have one in the office, and look for some stuff coming out on that. But we've seen examples where, I mean, we know people who have had X-ray machines and CT machines that are looking for basically anomalies in it. The problem that I have with this is how, like, is it even possible to operationalize that? Like, I don't think this process is something that, like, as an enterprise, I can go, well, I just bought, I don't know, like a couple thousand Cisco devices. Okay, I'm going to X-ray or CT scan every single one and see if there's any anomalies in the hardware to check for any kind of counterfeit components or any kind of tampering or any kind of hardware backdoors on the board or inside the silicon. Now, there's a lot of challenges there. Scale is one. Knowing what to look for is the other one. Just because you have the facility to image the device, well, it takes a certain skill set to look at that image and go, oh, I think that shouldn't be there, right? I mean, you could obviously just compare them. That would be a great job for like an LLM. Here's 1,000 images. Tell me which ones don't match, right? That could potentially spot something, but it's a difficult thing to operationalize. What's your guys' thoughts as to how we can add some level of assurance without making like every enterprise, every Fortune 1000 needs to have their own X-ray and CT machines to provide some kind of hardware validity?
It gets even worse than that. If you don't have a reference from the vendor of what it's supposed to look like if the vendor would provide you with reference images for every single device they vendor to you, that would be one entire thing, because now you at least have some baseline comparison, so you can potentially train an AI to actually detect anomalies based on, again, a known good. But like, how do you do this in case you have just this one or two Cisco devices which you got from a random place, and those are the only two Cisco devices of this model specifically in your fleet? You don't have a baseline to compare them against. So you don't always have 1,000 of the same device. And even if you think you have 1,000 of the same device, you don't actually have the 1,000 of the same exact one. So because like if you bought them in different years, welcome, there might be different hardware inside of them.
Yeah, agreed.
And
Agreed. That's where it's hard to go, okay, I got 1,000 of them. I don't know what the original's supposed to look like, but just tell me about the differences across these 1,000. You may still have differences, to your point, Vlad, because, you know, back to Josh's point, when they're manufacturing these things, they're just getting chips, you know, and it maybe it's a slightly different part number or whatnot, slightly different configuration. The ultimate end goal is the same. The capabilities are the same, but the hardware components could certainly be different. Larry, I think you and I first realized this back when we wrote the Linksys book. There were
Yeah.
discrepancies in various Linksys, you know, components, which is ironic because they were ultimately bought. They were bought and sold by Cisco. Like they went into Cisco and came back out.
Yeah, yeah. See, this was
Yeah.
exactly some of the stuff that I was doing. Hate to say it, like the same stuff we were doing in Linksys book. It was stuff that I was doing this week. I was putting OpenWrt on some old access points for
Yeah.
some fun goodies, and like version 9.2 of this router isn't supported by OpenWrt, but 9.1 is.
Yep,
And
because they
like,
swapped the component out.
because
Yep.
there was some component swap changes.
So we
Yep.
need, you know, it's. I think we need some kind of external third-party entity, and that solves a portion of the problem. The one of the problems that I think, let me back up, independent researchers can help solve is, I've acquired this device, I've done the analysis, and oh, by the way, I've found some kind of hardware component that is not listed in any of the documentation, right? And I think one of the first instances that I recall was like the first Google, before it was Google, it was just Nest. And the first Nest thermostats had Zigbee capabilities,
Yes.
but no implementation of those Zigbee capabilities, but the chip
Right.
was there. And
Right,
that
and
was,
they didn't.
it
They
turned out
didn't.
to
And
be
they didn't even
benign, right?
advertise. Yeah, they didn't even advertise that it was,
Exactly.
it had potential to be Zigbee compatible. One, because they hadn't written the software for it yet. But
Right.
when you do the teardown,
Details.
hey, what's this chip? What's this chip? Why
Right.
has it got Zigbee capabilities? What aren't they telling me?
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
and that's I think that's fairly common to include hardware that maybe your software firmware is not using yet, but maybe you want to release an update in the future that does take advantage of that hardware. And as long as it's not malicious, that's totally fine. I mean, maybe they were planning on some integration with the thermostat for Zigbee devices,
And they did. And they did.
and
They
so they did eventually do that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when it's a camera and a microphone, that gets awkward. I'm
When
sorry.
the camera and a
but- yeah.
microphone's on a KVM, was it Nano KVM? One of the KVMs.
Yeah.
They discovered that there was a microphone inside of it. But the more concerning part was when you reverse engineer the firmware, you realize that the Linux that's on that device has the full capabilities to use that microphone.
Yep.
It's just crazy.
Yep. Now, if they were
Crazy.
smart, that firmware wouldn't have had those capabilities, because why did you make it that more bloated, right?
Right.
But I on that one, I did see some argument about why you may want to have that future capabilities, like being able to listen to the microphone. So if it's in a remote location, you can tell if the fan is running because it's at temperature and some of those other types of failures. But still,
I'll
it's
set up a
not
camera for
accurate.
that. Thank you very much. I don't want that built into my KVM.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
It's-
I agree with that. But this is a case where independent security researchers can make an impact by doing this evaluation of these devices. Now, it's not great for scale, but it is for like a given product. I've analyzed one of them, and I was like, hey, there's something that wasn't documented, or something's not right here, in publishing that out. that is a great way to use the tools, especially that Bunny talks about in the presentation, to do that kind of stuff. I think is great. However, this doesn't scale, right? Like, what if only some of the nano KVMs or whatever were backdoored, right?
Well,
What if
it
it's
does and
an
it doesn't scale.
enterprise- What if it's an enterprise product that not every security researcher can gain access to an enterprise product? We're pretty much limited to what's on eBay.
So it does scale sort of, and real quick, the point is that I can put out a hardware bill of materials and a firmware bill of materials and a software bill of materials about this product, and you go, okay, that's cool, it looks beautiful, and I go, yes, it's awesome, isn't it? And you go, but how do I know you're not lying? And that's the problem. That's the part that doesn't scale, is the corroboration. And that's a big part of Bunny's talk, which, by the way, was a brilliant talk. I thought it was awesome. And the corroboration is what he spends the majority of his time talking about. So it doesn't scale because I need 14,000 devices tested. But if I need
Right.
this device tested, maybe I can make it scale by bountying it. Maybe I can say, hey, does somebody want to corroborate this? Because I have $1,000 for somebody to corroborate this on this device.
Oh yeah, we've seen kind of a trend of that, of people putting out bounties to do security research, to do feature implementation. What was that site? There is a site where people have set up bounties to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I
remember the
forget
name
what
of the
it
site.
was.
It's some
It
kind of
is,
weird
yeah.
name.
Was that
Yeah.
Zerodium or no? That was the 0 days.
No. No, we covered it about a month and a half ago on Security
remember.
Weekly.
Yeah.
It actually gets even more interesting when you start thinking about like firmware bill of materials. You will not detect it on a CT scan. You will not detect any tampering that might have happened with firmware specifically on a X-ray scan. And in many cases, if you get a device which has a closed shell, you ain't getting any access to firmware. Like, at best, the device might have some integrity self-test, which of course runs in the same firmware, which can be tampered with in the first place. So there's very little you can actually do to fully verify it. You can have some level of check, but you cannot actually get the firmware easily without
Yeah.
actual like deep hardware tools and whatnot.
And that segues into something that Bunny talked about in the talk. It was concerning for me. And there's a portion in the talk where he's describing, the debug interfaces that we have on the hardware, that you could use those to attempt to verify the hardware. However, if the hardware has been tampered with, it will know to lie to the debug interface and be like, nope, everything's fine. I don't have any of that stuff. And then in normal operations, it can run with the tampered hardware or other features, right? So attackers that are able to implant this deep into the hardware have a certain advantage in that scenario, which is interesting. Which sucks for us, quite frankly. In an attempt
Yeah.
to validate this hardware, it's like once an attacker controls the hardware, that's it. It's game over. So it's interesting to also talk about some of these ways in which we can look at the chips. I kind of, I'll be honest, I put this in a category of like, oh, you need an X-ray or CT machine to really do this well. I know, Larry, you and I have covered and Josh too, right on the other shows, decapping chips for various purposes, and that's complicated. Also, somewhat dangerous, right? There was one that was using like acid and chemicals to
Pretty
decap.
common.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it like don't take that lightly. If you're going down that path, I don't recommend it for safety reasons. It is certainly possible, but you got to take a lot of safety precautions. And I thought, X-ray machine, but there's stuff in between that's actually pretty reasonably priced. In fact, I think some of the most inexpensive ways to potentially look, and you can't look at all chips this way, but is the devices that have the infrared filter removed and using infrared. Have you done this, Larry, Vlad, or Josh?
No. I mean,
Yeah.
in some of the
Yeah,
old
so-
days, like there's been use IR to wipe chips from some of the older stuff back in the 80s and 90s, but I've never done.
I mean, you're
this
talking about
particular
EPROMs, though.
purpose.
You're not talking about something
Right.
that's going to touch
Exactly.
a commercial. Yeah. Okay. Do you remember the chips with the window in the middle of them?
Yep.
those I know you do, Larry. I'm sorry, but those chips were designed to be wiped by, was it IR or UV? I forget.
I think
Light.
it might have been UV. Yep.
It might have been UV light, but they were designed to be wiped by that because they were development chips, and you keep writing code to them until you got it right, and then you'd either put a sticker over the window.
Yeah. Is it
You
essentially
like the sticker.
is it similar way night vision cameras work essentially?
Yeah, you can take a
Yeah.
a webcam, older webcam, and literally pull a piece of film out of it. It was a cut filter, and then you could have night vision cameras. They were god awful, but they would work. Nowadays, it's much different, but it just anyway. But the chips to be what's the right word to be wiped by IR is it's an IR projector, not an IR receiver that wipes them.
Yeah. So Bunny describes the shiny chips are good for the infrared or iris, right, process,
Yep.
and there are a lot of cheap USB microscopes. I think he talked about
Oh,
using
yeah.
some of those that you can remove the IR filter from. He also had a Sony A5000, an older Sony mirrorless camera, and was able to remove the IR filter from that and had a very specific lens on it that he was using to look under the cap on a chip, which I thought was interesting. I mean, that's stuff that maybe you have laying around, right? Maybe
Yeah.
you've got an old digital camera laying around and you're not using it, you haven't sold it or whatever. Now you can use it for some potential security research, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah, and this is fascinating. And thinking about it, this beyond just the research part, this may be helpful for organizations to start validating that the hardware that they've received are matching the H bombs, if that was something that they
Yeah.
wanted to do.
Mhm.
The problem is we talked earlier about scale. Like doing this isn't going to scale. If you want to validate, you're going to have to take apart every device that comes into your organization and do this inventory and do the comparison. And like that's not going to happen for a couple of reasons. You buy 1,000 routers from Cisco. Who's going to take apart all 1,000 routers and validate them? And more importantly, when you take them apart, does it void your warranty? And security research purposes, yeah, absolutely. But to go to some of the heart of the problem about being able to have assured hardware, I don't. This is definitely not one that's going to solve the problem easily.
Mm. I really want to set up one of these things to look at some of this hardware. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that there are several different, more cost-effective ways to be able to do this, which is pretty awesome. And a site that
Yeah.
you can Can you upload images to this site, or is that a site that Larry, you and I were talking about a site because when it transcribed it from YouTube, it transcribed the site with an O instead of a 0.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
had to do a little digging, I think, through another AI, and it told me, where is it now? How did I lose the chat I had with you guys?
It was Silicon
Oh,
Prawn.
there it is. Silicon Prawn. In the YouTube transcript, transcribe what Bunny said is PRON, but it's PR0N. And that is a website where it looks. I don't know if just anyone can upload an image. Is that true?
I don't know.
I didn't actually look at that capability.
I know if you go to the archive, I don't know if you can upload, but it's a wiki effectively for that. So you may be able to if you have a login and that type of stuff.
Oh yeah,
I think-
they say if I already have images, can I add them? Yes, we can create you an account. You can give it to us to import. So yeah.
That's awesome.
The best part about this is that it was translated as Silicon Prawn, PRON. You found it as 0N, but the actual site says something about prawn, PRAWN.
Shrimp,
Both
silicon shrimps.
Yeah, silicon shrimp, both in the banner and when you go to the wiki, it says linked pages when available can be found at siliconprawn.org, PRAWN. So you can't blame AI for being confused on this one.
Yeah, I was worried. I thought it hallucinated, like the
Yep.
whole thing. I'm like, did it just hallucinate this site? Because Bunny just makes like a quick reference to it. He makes reference to actually to a lot of different tools and sites in the talk. Like I need to like go through the talk again, in a little more detail. So. But then he gets like really. There's some other fancier things for looking at hardware. I'm trying to find them now. I lost my show notes. He had some really fancy machinery that he said had open source software, things you can build on your own that kind of build on those capabilities using infrared, technology to be able to look at the silicon. He had one that was like spinning the light around and I believe taking pictures of the chips, which is pretty awesome. He also talks about Moore's law too, on how it doesn't necessarily get cheaper. That there was like a point in 2010 where to add more transistors onto the board, they actually become more expensive. And he's like, so Moore's law is basically dead. I think that's the first time I've heard a reference to like Moore's law being dead. We kind of always just relied on Moore's law. But basically what he says in the talk is like, look, in 2010, Moore's law was good, right? Like we added capabilities, things got cheaper, but then as we started to add more transistors after that, things actually got a lot more expensive, which is kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, he said what it was at the 28 nanometer.
Yeah, 28 nanometer.
Nanometers, yeah.
He said basically that the idea here is that anything beyond that is possible, but God, it's expensive. So more than likely, that's going to be where everybody stays forever. But look, remember, we saw this not long ago. It was, and by the way, Moore's law isn't dead; it's just shifted, and I'll talk about that in a second. But Bunny's 100% sort of wrong, and I don't mean Bunny's awesome. Don't get me wrong. But like Bunny's wrong. So the point is that it's cheaper to go and build more cores than it is to try to build more transistors into a single core. And we saw that with the licensing debacles of 10 years ago, when they were charging you per core. So everybody was putting more transistors, then they shifted to putting it on how many transistors or how capable that CPU was. Mm-hmm. So then people were building big cores that weren't more oomphy, but I just put more cores in a system, that kind of thing. And how many threads can I run and things like that. So it's 28 nanometers or nanometers or whatever. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. 28 nanometers is probably where we're going to stay for the next 10 or 20 years. When you talk about classic binary computing, Moore's law has shifted to quantum computing.
Right.
That's where Bunny's a bit wrong. Because the best and the brightest of people doing cool new computing stuff are doing it in the quantum realm because there's a lot of money there.
Yeah. And how do we translate this to the quantum realm?
It's the same thing to a certain extent. Yeah, it's just slightly different computing, but the problem of what the hell is that silicon doing is still the problem.
So, like last time I checked quantum computer, weren't there like at least like 100 qubits at most? So that was not enough to do quite a lot of tasks. Like unless we get a much bigger quantum computer, like with quite a lot more qubits, we ain't getting anywhere with those. So,
this is not about quantum computing, but I will state that you're correct. However, Moore's law doesn't care where you start from. It just cares that every 18 months you get twice as fast.
Quantum computing will probably be getting much more than twice as fast every 18 months.
So Moore's law holds.
Slightly different law. Yeah, it will be getting much more faster for quite a while. Anyway, that's just speculation at this point. And also, like, there is SML machines with like insane engineering, which etch like super small things onto chips, with like insane systems of mirrors and whatnot. But like again, I cannot see how that's gonna get into every single device we have. Like, it's gonna make quite a few of them way too overpriced.
Yeah, I mean, you can make smaller than that, but it's just going to be, holy God, that's expensive. Is that what you're saying?
Yep. It's not just expensive, it's just going to be overkill as well. Like, sure, you can make it smaller, but it's like, okay, it's not eating like 25 milliwatts, it's eating like 15 milliwatts. And why do I care?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, your kids watch Bluey too, huh? Okay. My little one has walked up to me that they said, "And why do I care?" I was like, "What the heck is what?" And turns out there's something called Unicorse and Bluey that is a sock puppet and goes, "And why do I care?" Sorry, but yeah, so it's
I don't even know that reference. That's the
oh,
funny part.
that is funny.
Well, Josh,
No,
you
but in
should,
all
you should be
seriousness,
you should
Yeah,
be
we'll send you
concerned
some
when
links
she
after
comes.
the show. Vlad.
Yeah, well, you should be more concerned when she comes up and asks, "But did you die?"
Right.
oh god.
Sorry.
So the point is you're right, but for and Bunny says it in the presentation, cheap chips, and you put it in the show notes, Paul, for
Mhm.
cheap chips, for sort of commodity level chips. Look, I mean, we've been building faster and faster computers, but what do we buy our office workers? We buy them something with 4, 8, or 12 or 16 gigs of RAM. They don't need 32. A reasonably decent, i5, i3, i7 is all they need. We could get them bigger, faster, smarter, stronger, but they don't need it.
Well,
So and when we hit that
things there.
plateau,
Two things there. Memory is very expensive today. Now I'm told that's a bubble that is going to burst, is what
yeah.
some industry analysts have said. Also, there's the minimum requirements for Windows 11, right, which is forcing on us a little better hardware, and also a hardware that supports security mechanisms, some of which are, performing hardware roots of trust in general, which I think is a positive thing. But it does all come down to trust. I think all of us collectively have spoken with or followed the work of Alan Friedman, who I do want to bring back on the show as well. And when we look at what I like I like Alan's vision of the H bomb, because he's not just basing it on the technical, like what's inside of it, how do we attest to it from a technical perspective, but what Alan's pushing for in the H bomb and others as well is where did this chip come from? What was its journey, right? Almost like a manifest. Like, where was it designed? Where was it fabbed? Where was it packaged? Where was it shipped to and from, in having this manifest on your hardware? Now, I think if we had that in a perfect world, we could then perhaps rank, based on incidents perhaps, that well, if it followed this path and this particular entity was in the path, it's a much lower level of confidence in the trust of that hardware. Thoughts on how we can, from a non-technical level, provide better visibility into almost like a manifest for your hardware?
Well, sorry, this is fun because this is something I'm working on right now. So, I mean, I'm trying to put together a nonprofit to actually do this kind of value chain stuff, value chain risk. And the value chain risk is a bloody nightmare because I don't know where my software comes from, my firmware comes from, my hardware, my cryptography, my anything. And for the longest time, it was just test it and make sure it works. The problem is, look, they found out with malware. Sometimes they've now put in malware. Do you know you're in a sandbox? Don't detonate. Wait 72 hours, then detonate. Whatever,
right.
all kinds of things. And the same thing is happening with hardware, with firmware, with cryptography, with whatever. There can be so many conditions. So you need something that is a level of assurance that is much higher. And so with hardware specifically, the actual physical pieces. And by the way, don't even talk about computer hardware for a minute. How about, I got my vitamins here. How about vitamins? How do you know that your vitamins have what they're supposed to have in them and not stuff they're not supposed to have? Okay.
Well,
It's the exact same problem.
They're FDA approved, right?
Yeah. And they're not. What's that, Larry?
And tested.
Yeah,
at least at some
but
point.
that's the problem, right? That's the problem, is where are they tested and how often are they tested? It's the same thing with hardware. I get one router or a switch and I test them. Like, oh, it's all good, but how do I test the rest of it, right? Maybe it met some specification, got some certification, but that was just from the design perspective. That was from one board.
Right.
It's the same thing with the FCC, Larry. I take that thing,
but
it goes to their labs for testing, and then that's it.
Let's take that vitamin analogy, because that's really great. If you think about the FDA here in the U.S., about what's happening is that if you want to sell that on the market, you have to certify. And you have to have precise documentation about what went into your product and where that product was sourced from,
Right.
So you have that evidentiary chain. You have that supply chain of all of the components,
Well,
and,
and
and I think that's
most of the vitamins aren't FDA approved.
right.
Yeah, they're not even FDA
Exactly.
touched.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But still,
but if I want to
They're
know,
like your Android TV boxes you buy from Amazon.
exactly. But and quite honestly, that is what we need to start seeing on the hardware side, is that we need that chain of evidence
Mhm.
that, hey, we're building this device. We need the provenance. And same thing eventually will happen with our code. Like, hey, you want to run open source software on your device? Well, great. Tell me where that code came from. Like, this is
Yeah.
connected vehicle rule all over. Like, this is
you-
connected vehicle
it's
rule written
all
all
the
over.
bloody same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
It's all the same.
where
That's
did the
the thing.
code come from? Well, it's an open source project that was on GitHub that was contributed by people from Russia, China, Bolivia, the United States, Antarctica. I'm not picking on anyone in particular, but
All those
you
damn
ha-
Antarcticans.
I mean, you need to have that provenance of where it originated and what went into it at a very detailed level, and at what ratios, and all of your suppliers and so forth.
And how often is it checked? And if it's checked once a year, that's not enough. I'm sorry, but point in time compliance, point in time security is not
Yes.
sufficient. So we have to be doing things on a continuous basis. And we have to be able to plug these variables that, Larry, you just named so many of, into some sort of equation or process so I can understand the risk. Because if the risk of a connected vehicle is more deaths, okay, because the brakes will lock up once every year at a random time. I'm making this up. It's hilariously weird. But that's a risk, and there's a risk quantification and a risk calibration that needs to be done. Is that within your risk appetite? Then there's your vitamins, your medicines, your whatever. Do you know that the medicine, the generic you got, is absolutely molecule for molecule identical? Do you know that the vitamin doesn't have arsenic in it or whatever? God knows it's horrible, but
Yeah.
just pointing that out.
It's a great point, Josh. Like, we don't have the facility to test that at home. Right,
Of course not.
Testing the components of something like a vitamin requires elaborate and very expensive gear.
And
to
plus,
do that.
it's not even necessarily poison, but how do you know that your hot sauce doesn't have heavy metals in it? Protein powders. How many of us use protein powders as part of our, like a shake or a smoothie or whatever? And do you know that the vegan protein powders tend to have more heavy metals in them? Like, that's not cool. So
But it's the
how do
same
you test for
scenario,
that?
right? Like, we don't test for that individually, whereas enterprises aren't testing the hardware for any backdoors. We're relying on, well, first, trusting the source or the vendor, and look where that gets us in a lot of situations. The next best thing, I think, is independent testing, right? That's where we see on things like vitamins that there are studies where someone does test that component. Someone does, testing of the people who are taking those vitamins, right? We need the same thing. I mean, we've talked about Cyber UL for a long time. I'm not sure what happened to that, but we do need, I believe, some level of independent testing to spot
Yep.
check. Because right now we're
Argu-
just blindly trusting.
Arguably, Cyber UL kind of got turned into Cyber Trustmark,
Mhm.
and that has now kind of since gone by the wayside, given
Has
administration.
it
changes.
fully
Yes.
gone?
It's not.
Yeah.
We're just not talking about it anymore, and there's been no movement.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm
but
so sorry.
I think the hard part with that, actually, I draw on some of my cigar experience as well, right? Because the FDA was trying to get involved with handmade cigars, and anytime we have this regulation, we run into the problem of the more regulation that we have and the barriers of entry to market, the more we kind of just poo-poo on the capitalism, and it makes it harder for people to enter the market, which is a very interesting problem to talk about in terms of this testing for hardware too, right? We wouldn't have commodity hardware that we can buy on Amazon if it involved, in order to get it on Amazon, they had to spend a lot of money to get it validated and certified in some way. Perhaps there's a happy medium, right? But
Yep.
if you say it costs $100,000 to get the product certified, well, look at the margins on this. I think of the Haribo gummy battery packs and earbuds. Right? Like, what's their? They spent money. They spent money and licensed the trademark from Haribo, who makes gummy bears, and they made these battery packs and earbuds. And when someone did the independent analysis, Larry, you brought this story to us this week, that they found that the batteries were of poor quality controls.
Yep,
right?
and arguably dangerous.
And
Yeah.
Amazon pulled it because of the independent testing. So independent testing does play a role in this process.
Yeah. And on the converse, like if we think about stifling, with regulation stifling, open and free market. On the converse, look at somebody like Hack5, who with their Wi-Fi pineapples, years ago they started not being able to get the open source, the open commodity routers that they were building their platform on, so
Yep.
they built their own.
Yep.
They ended up building their own, and the conversation that I remember having with Darren at the time was like, yeah, we went through the certification process with the FCC to get these devices certified because we had our own custom boards made. And he said the only way we could do this was if we actually made so many boards and sold this many products.
Yeah.
Which
yeah,
is
to
why
make it worth it. Yeah.
Which is why the Wi-Fi Pineapple line for many
so
years
expensive.
didn't change.
Yeah.
Because they had to go through
right,
the
right.
inventory of the current stuff and why they weren't really doing any development.
Right. It's also
So,
why they
wait,
carry
wait,
a higher
And-
price
and-
tag. I mean, we know we can build
Right,
the
right.
equivalent much cheaper, right?
Yep,
But
and-
they
and-
went through
and
the
sa-
process of getting certified.
Same thing for this.
Yeah.
Their pager was available and was being shown and given to select folks at DEF CON last year, but they couldn't offer them for sale because they were still getting their FCC approval.
Right. But FCC
But I
approval.
want to point out
Go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
that Dre Gordon is now at Hack5, and he's
Yeah.
so happy there. It's pitiful. I love it.
It's
It makes me
awesome.
happy.
It's a great
that he's there.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he told me that he's redesigned the firmware to make them incredibly more efficient and to be able to do so much more work. That, as far as I know, did not require a re-FCC update. Okay,
Correct.
Right, because the radio communications didn't change, and that's what the FCC
Right.
is testing. Is right, Larry? Correct me if I'm wrong. FCC is only testing any radio communications.
Yeah, arguably only radio transmissions.
Right, radio trans.
Yeah.
Yes, you're correct.
Yep.
Radio
And-
transmissions.
And that said, Paul, like, if I want to get this listed on Amazon, I've got to go through this FCC approval process. I
Not
have
true.
stuff that I have bought off of Amazon. Quite honestly, it was one of my SANS course pen test type targets things. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, hey, you've got this device, and we tell you to go look up the FCC ID. And sure enough, the device they've got in their labs has no FCC ID because they didn't go through the
That's
approval
interesting.
process, and it transmits, and it's completely in
Yeah.
violation of U.S. law, and yet they sell
Okay,
it.
so
Oh.
it is in
Cheap.
violation of U.S. law.
Oh,
to
dude,
do that.
there are
That's
devices on
interesting.
Amazon right now that are blatantly illegal.
Oh yeah, totally.
Blatantly, not even
Yeah,
like,
which,
oh,
like
it's
I
just
said-
not like, no.
But like I said earlier this week, it grinds my gears because you can't buy a Flipper Zero from Amazon because they deem that as dangerous. But you can buy an Android TV box that's backdoored with malware. You can buy, now I'm learning, stuff that is not FCC certified.
You can buy jammers on Amazon,
Interesting.
which
Well,
are not just like not FCC certified. They are illegal to possess.
are they illegal
Yes.
to possess or just illegal? Can you use
Yes.
them in a lab environment?
No, not unless
thought
you
there
have a
was-
certified lab.
I'll defer to Larry on that one.
I don't believe they're illegal to possess. They're illegal to manufacture, import, build, and some of those. I don't believe they're illegal to possess, but they're illegal to use.
Okay, so that device over my shoulder is not on, so hopefully I'm
They're
violation of any law. Which is it's interesting.
oh, you may be right. The operation, marketing, or sale.
Yep.
Interesting.
I thought there were clauses for research and lab work.
Yeah, but the lab has to be certified. It has to be,
Okay, yeah.
So it's all, and also it depends on whether it's cell phone jammer or a radio jammer. And yes,
Right,
I know
but
that cell
also-
phones operate on the radio frequency, but don't be
But there's
too pedantic.
open frequencies that you are able to
Mhm.
transmit on. But if the device is purpose built to do jamming, then that's the issue.
Right.
Right, because on those open frequencies, it's ISM, the Industrial Scientific and Medical
Mhm.
Band. The ISM band is so that you do not need to possess a personal license, that the licensing has been done by the manufacturer in those
Yep.
bands.
I gotcha.
And
Yeah.
as a jammer, it violates all of those rules for the ISM bands.
Interestingly enough, if you're sending out massive amounts of 2.4 is one of the 2.4 is one of the
Universal
ISM
standard.
bands. If you're sending out massive amounts of 2.4 signal in order to power a device wirelessly, it is not technically considered a jammer, even though you are jamming everything around.
Yeah, yeah.
I forgot who found this out, but there's a machine shop that powered their fluorescent lighting wirelessly with 2.4. It was really tough to put Wi-Fi there.
Yep. I remember
Yeah.
you telling us this story.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
So
it's an interesting segue to think about. We've been talking about enterprises that are acquiring hardware and assuring that that hardware is what it says it is, to be able to trust it. And a lot of most enterprises are ordering from major companies. But when we as security researchers or hackers, when we go acquire a device, I bet you all four of us have acquired devices that are ordered from China that allow us certain capabilities. And I'm sure all of us have thought about, what if there is some kind of hardware and or firmware backdoor inside of those, right? I think that the software equivalent is your IDE that comes with plugins that are stealing your tokens, right? What if we have the equivalent inside of the security researcher type hardware? I've talked about this before, especially with the ESP32 platform. Like what if someone's backdooring the firmware and or hardware? How do we know, right? It comes back to, I think what we've identified is there's independent testing, there's government testing, but that just is a part of the problem, right?
Well, there's personal testing. How many of us monitor our network traffic?
Yeah, any of this stuff, right? I mean, how much of us trust any kind of hardware, firmware, or software? I think there's a lot of, and I was just working on slides yesterday here at Eclipsium that were speaking to that. That there, in I think what I'm coming down to is there's still a lot of implicit trust that we have. That was like when I first started here at Eclipsium. I'm like, okay, so we give people a laptop and we just kind of trust that the manufacturer has done their due diligence so that the hardware, and specifically UEFI, is configured correctly. And we're like, well, the manufacturer should take care of that. And we're like, yeah, but there's so many instances where they have not, right? I mean, Vlad and I, this is our world, right? There's so many cases where they have not. I mean, even if there is a root of trust, we just saw this with the PlayStation 5. Once that root of trust is broken, once someone gets a hold of the key, if it's physically fused into the board, it's game over. It's game over. There is no now level of assurance on those devices. Now, for the PS5, people are doing it to modify their devices. They could also, when you're going to go mod your PS5, which is probably illegal, but what if that has some kind of backdoor? Now you have no assurances from. I mean, you trusted Sony, but now you have to trust the internet. And those are two different things. You shouldn't trust either. But
so that leads to the, what is a high assurance router or a high assurance SSD, and how do we get there? And I don't know, because I think that's a lot of money. Go ahead, Vlad. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it gets even worse. Like in the past, if you read like all of the spy stories of like, oh hey, this rock was transmitting data secretly and covertly and nobody knew. Well, now like in the past, to build this rock, you needed capabilities of an entire secret service and whatnot, right? Now a single random Joe can just do it at home, right? And like just building such a rock is no longer very hard. You don't need quite as many advanced capabilities. You can just buy some random small board and just put it in a nice rock-looking container and drop it off wherever the hell you want.
Yeah.
Or, for example, if you are a manufacturer in China, who said that your devices cannot have an extra radio transmitter, which you would not know about? And even if you have all of the traffic monitoring in the world, if it connects to some random other place to transmit data, well, hello there.
You're reminding me of the typewriters that were backdoored by the Russian KGB.
And the Great Seal.
Mm-hmm.
The typewriter one is awesome. If you're digging this topic, go look that up. It's a fascinating story that was somewhat like recently declassified that had happened, but the U.S. found that there was electronics inside of typewriters. I believe they were being stationed in an embassy. Might have been the U.S. embassy in Russia, right? And they
In
had
Moscow,
radio frequency capabilities that they had built inside of the
If I remember correctly,
typewriters.
they were IBM Selectric. That was a
Probably.
specific model.
Yeah. So there's a
So
history. There is. I mean, it's interesting. There is a history of hardware backdoors and somewhat of a cat and mouse game. But to Vlad's point today, things are so much more advanced than a typewriter. Obviously, that it's exacerbated this problem.
we should have another talk about this because we still need to talk about what a high assurance whatever is. How do you procure it properly? How do you what's the value of it properly? And then on a long-term basis, what is the continuous management, monitoring, and corroboration of the efficacy of the security and the trust value for these devices? Because honestly, this is a huge topic.
Yeah,
There
because
is
it's kind of like. Go ahead, Vlad.
Yeah, like you're speaking about a world where I have a keyboard which has dual core ARM CPU in the
Right.
keyboard.
Yeah.
Just
there is-
crazy.
Perfect.
Well, what are you talking about?
and but also to that point, things dynamically update. Go
Wait,
back to
even better. I have a pen with a dual core ARM CPU. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Your fridge is watching you with a camera, for Christ's sake. Like, oh
and
my
all
God.
these things need to update firmware and apps on them. And the problem is, like, at what point do you have assurance? And this was a huge thing that I discovered in the context of BadBox and Kim Wolf, which are the pre-infecting largely Android TV devices, is that the app that you might be looking at today may be malicious or benign. But through an update, it could flip-flop, right? A benign app could then become malicious or vice versa. Really just highlighting how this is a cat and mouse game and underscoring the need for this continuous monitoring of not just what's on the platform, but what's being transmitted, even not just on the network, but over radio frequencies, which is kind of interesting.
It gets even more fun. Like I have to mention research by Mickey in this case, like our colleague with me and Paul, who pretty much found a Linux web camera. And why I say Linux web camera? It's because Linux is running on the web camera, not because it's
Oh, I
connected
have
to
those.
Linux
I have
box.
those
I
cameras.
have some of those too, yeah.
Yeah, and like you can actually drop updates with whatever you want. The vendor does not actually check signatures. So what he did is he dropped an update which allowed this camera to present itself as a network card, as a keyboard, as whatever the hell it wants. And with like some minimal investment in time, like and manipulation to the camera, again, maybe it took him a while, but imagine that that's like 20 dudes in some secret service or some hacker group doing this, which will make it much faster. And like, so you have a camera which pretty much connects by itself to the internet by suddenly starting to present itself as a network card, getting to share internet connection to itself. Then it presents itself as a keyboard, gets some inputs to the host device.
Yep.
It's literally malware that's physically connected to your laptop or to
And
your
if you're
computer.
wondering if you can run Doom on them, you can. So
You can.
unfortunately,
You can actually.
we're out of time today. But I want to thank everyone for coming on the show today, and thank everyone for listening and watching this edition of the Below the Surface podcast. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Over
Paul.
and out.
Thank you.